Ah, great. Whoops.
There we go.
There it is.
Okay. So I'm going to kind of summarize a little bit of the history of what we've done at the Alliance in looking at parking, and also what we did this year, which we surveyed in both March and in August of this year. And just a second here.
Call from Andrew G. Bridges.
Okay, our survey work actually started in 2008, and Steve Lynn, who was the original president of the Alliance, got a request from the city to help them in kind of determining the amount of supply, gather factual information. And that's actually the first thing I did with the Alliance was in 2008. And what we do each time we do this is we put together a set of volunteers. And so the survey involves taking samples every 2 hours from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. in the downtown area. And we're trying to look at the time of what it changes by time of day, weekday versus weekend, summer versus winter, et cetera. We've always shared our results with the city, and sometimes we've actually recommended policy. We had extensive involvement during Chuck Hunter's regime in looking at parking, length of parking time, and some things of that nature. This year we did something new. We added private parking, marinas, and churches to the survey. And this is the first year we've done that in a comprehensive manner. We actually divide the data up into different zones. And so you see the 5 zones that we use here. The Finholm area, what we call the Museum District, Millville, Downtown, and Judson. And so our data will be summarized in those areas, and the parking patterns look different in each of these. Now, this is what the total supply looked at like when we did it this year. We've traditionally looked at just public, and you can see the supply of public is about 523 stalls. And that's only about 25% of the total when you look at the big picture. And so marinas are about 278, private lots are 1384, and the 3 major churches on the perimeter of the area have 415 stalls. And so that's kind of a real revelation is how much there is in areas that are not public. If we look at, this is looking at time of day, and rather than looking at all of them, I'm looking at just a few of the areas. I like to call the 7 a.m. the base level. There's a few people that have come down here on a commute at 7 a.m., but most of the people at 7 a.m. are the people that were there all night. They're cars from residents or very early people. And at that time, there are only about 6% of all the stalls used and 11% of the public stalls used. The peak is generally 1 p.m. when about 44% of all the stalls are used and 75% of the public. And so you can see here how different it is. Churches obviously have very little use. The most use, except for Sunday, is at St. Nicholas in terms of their class activities. Other than that, there's very little use. And you can see marinas vary quite a bit. At 1 o'clock is their peak, like other areas. And you can see the peak. The peak is quite different for private on weekdays versus Saturday, because a lot of those people are people that work at office environments during the week. And so at peak, there's about 700 or 800 cars that come to the downtown area compared to the 7 a.m. period. Foster, wait. Some of the other, that's my grandson that just came in. So from a seasonality standpoint, you can see that we have a lot more people in the summer than in the winter. And so the percentage of use of the parking in this summary is significantly higher, about 38% higher in the summer. Also, in the day of the week, there's quite a bit of difference. You'll see that the weekend is much higher than it is during the week. If we look at the districts, you see quite a bit of difference. If you look at the Finholm district at 1 p.m., you see 100% of the spaces being used, and also at 7 p.m. There's quite a bit of usage for restaurant in that area. And so it stays high from about 11 a.m. all the way till 7 p.m. Downtown area is the second most highly utilized, and it peaks at 1 p.m., stays pretty high up till 7 p.m., but does taper off. The other areas are much less utilized. And part of the issue with parking, where you get the areas that are highly utilized, is seeing if we can direct people to some of the areas that are less utilized. One of the interesting, I guess it's interesting, maybe that's not the right word, over the last few years is the impact of the pandemic. And so 2020 is the year that's most influenced by the pandemic. And so you can see how much parking dropped from 2019. In the winter, there were 51% fewer cars downtown parked than there were in 2019. In the summer, there were 17% less. And part of that is restrictions were most severe in March of 2020, which was the winter survey. By August, they were a little less restrictive and we had more people coming. In 2021, we've seen parking come back, but it's still down. And so we're down 13% in the winter and 2% in the summer, but there's still an impact that we see compared to 2019.
Gary?
Yes.
Is that slide, is that one taking into consideration all of the parking? Churches, marinas?
This is the public, Jim.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were the days that you used this year?
Which?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't.
The days that you did the survey on this year?
We did it on Thursday and Saturday. And so for both the winter and the summer, we did Thursday and Saturday. Now, we also did in the summer, we did part of Wednesday so we could see the impact of the farmers market. But for years, we've done it on both Thursday and Saturday, Thursday being an example of a weekday and Saturday for the weekend.
Right. But do you have the specific days that you did it?
I think it was about March 11th. I have to look that up. I don't know that I.
And then what about in the summer?
We did it August 12th and 14th. I may have to look up the, I don't know that I have that in front of me, but it was early March.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Okay. Now, one of the other questions that's kind of interesting is what's going on. I mean, parking is frequently an area of complaint, which you get in the council in the city, but is it really increasing a lot? And as we've done this survey, we've gotten more and more consistent. And starting with 2018, we've done it similar days every year in a similar methodology. And so prior to that, we didn't do it as consistently. And so unfortunately, it's hard to tell what the increase is year to year because of the pandemic. But if you look at the data, look at Saturday in the winter in 2015, you'd see 53% utilization, then 56 in 2018, 65, then it dropped to 26% and then back up to 56. And so if you kind of look at the different pieces of data, it definitely appears there was an increasing utilization for 2015 to 2019. The last 2 years are really hard to conclude from that. I don't know how much will be out of the pandemic next year. I think we all hope we'll be a lot more out of it and we'll get a better feeling. But I'd say the data seems to say that we're seeing an increase of 2 or 3% per year, but it's not clear because we don't have enough years. So what are some of the observations from all the data? And we have tons of data, and this is just a summary. But one of them is I strongly feel that the parking situation should be a subset of dealing with the overall vision for downtown. We have 2,600 parking stalls and we seldom use them all. So part of the question is how much do we want to create more parking versus encourage walking behavior? If we do create parking, do we want it on the perimeter? Do we want to improve sidewalks and things like that? Nationally, there's just a big excess of parking. The parking is sufficient overall, but there are selective problems. Peak times, particularly 1 o'clock or in Finholm from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. is a problem. Finholm is probably the hardest. Downtown is probably the second hardest. But downtown, there are a lot of alternatives. There's usually parking on Judson. If you go on the parking on Soundview, there's some parking. So it's easier to solve the downtown problems. Finholm is more difficult. Employee parking is a big issue. And this is something we might want to zero in. We've discussed at the Alliance doing specific surveys in that area. There are probably in excess of 500 employees downtown. I asked the city once and they came up with a number of 700, but the question is how you define that. Do you really know? But the bottom line is there's a lot of people. So the employee parking is a particular problem in itself. And so one of the strategies is to look for sharing options. These are not easy because a lot of the private or marina owners start out by saying, no, I don't want anybody parking in my spot. But if we could free up just a few places in church lots, marina lots, and other private lots, and do it in a controlled basis. So for whoever owns a lot, we can tell them it's going to only be people with stickers in their windows. Maybe there's volunteer patrolling. I think that's something that could help by getting employees out of the prime customer spots. You know, I think signage or potentially phone apps. We've looked at phone apps, and most of them are designed to find pay parking lots that aren't being used. But we might create something that helps alert people to where the spots are. Some of the private lots are very available on Saturdays behind the Willis building, you know, up in Jersey Center. There's quite a bit of parking in these areas. And so can we get approval and have apps where somebody can go on their phone, either on the Alliance website or the cities or the chambers, and direct people? We probably also could approve signage. We have signage, but they're usually just a little blue sign with an arrow that says parking. We might do something that encourages people to look for spots. We get questions about time limits, and we might want to reevaluate these. Like in Chuck's regime, we did specific review of where we should have 30-minute and 2-hour limits and made some changes. We're not going to be really policing these with the Gig Harbor Police Department, but we might consider volunteer enforcement things. If we mobilize volunteers that put a nice, pleasant message on there that remind people that it's a 2-hour limit, we might have some impact. I think most people, if they got a little notice on their window, would stop parking there. Some wouldn't. Again, if we do new parking, I think it's best on the perimeter. I mean, everybody wants to preserve the downtown identity as a small town area. And getting too many cars driving there, driving through it, or parking in it creates a problem. So somehow if we can create perimeter parking and a good walking oriented downtown. You know, from a city standpoint, you know, I think involvement of this committee, but also marketing and public works and planning, which this is more related to, there are efforts in all of those that we could do. In some of the finding parking that's available, marketing might help with that. We can use outside organizations like the Alliance, perhaps the Chamber, to coordinate a public-private effort. The city has a lot of things on their plate, so I think using people to help makes a lot of sense. I think a survey of current employee parking would be helpful. That's a particularly unique problem. And you get a lot of complaints downtown where a merchant has somebody else's employee parking in front of their store. And if we could remove some of that, we'd create more parking for visitors and customers. And so I think sharing is important. In doing this, it's important to go about it in a way that might be successful. We need to clarify a model for sharing parking and then test it. And in my opinion, I think you need to go what I call the soft bellies first. There are some people that are dead set against it. Go to people that you think might be supportive to see if we could get started in doing that. And again, I've mentioned the signage and the time limits. I think we should visit those as well. So that's some of the data and some of the ideas we've come up with in the Alliance Committee, and I'd be glad to entertain any discussion or questions.
How broadly has this been shared with the downtown business community? In other words, out beyond the Waterfront Alliance Committee?
Probably not enough. I mean, we've done presentations before. On this year's data, I don't think we've done a presentation to the downtown business community. I think that's a good idea. That should be done. Uh, I mean, I own the Harbor Center building in downtown, and I deal with my own problems just in between the tenants. And I think all we can do to create a sense of a reality with the businesses downtown is really helpful. So that's a good idea.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, looking at the numbers, we're underutilizing the total parking space that's available down there. And as you've indicated, roughly 50% at max times. Okay. So it would seem to me that better utilization of the space we have through some means, I don't know what that means is yet, is by far a more realistic solution to our parking problems. Okay. That is, utilize what we've got and then talk about expanding something. And even then, I think expansion is going to be a tough sell, no matter which way you go. It's just the view basin is very bounded,
yep.
Put it that way. So I think there's going to be some issues there. In fact, I think there's going to be a lot of issues there. What I'm thinking of is, I believe the business community has or should have the most interest in helping to solve this problem. Okay. I think the city can support, and this is my own personal view, but I think the real incentive lies with the business community. That is, what can we do collectively? And by the way, I'm not talking about anybody donating and anybody receiving. I'm talking more about, hey, there has to be what I call the equivalent of parking currency. You can trade this stuff across lines, et cetera. And people who provide extra parking spaces should be helped. Okay, they should be compensated for that. But that's just my view. So anyway, I would think that a wide dissemination of this information is really key, particularly, like I said, to the business community. They're the ones that I think are the ones that are going to be called upon to help solve the problem. And it's in their own best interest. That's the other thing.
I think that's a really good idea. And, you know, we've, everybody's held back on meetings for the last 2 years or last year and a half.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of part of this COVID-19 time. But I absolutely agree with you. And we need people to understand what the issue is and that we have a lot of parking. It's just not always at the right time in the right place. Yep. And if we can work together, it's very expensive to create more parking. I mean, the city knows that. There also
may be some, I wouldn't want to call them test cases, but I guess they would be. Right now, we have a situation where we have several dispensers of spirits who would like to, in essence, like to maintain the outside seating and essentially capacity that goes with that on an ongoing basis. That's been proposed several times. Then it was just extend the existing moratorium on some certain city code requirements. And now we're starting to get some interest in, gee, why don't we make that permanent? And then parking comes up as the number one issue each time. What I'm thinking of in my mind here is, noise aside, and I know noise and lights are an issue in some cases, but it would be neat if we could figure out a way that, okay, suppose they were able to utilize some of this open space, okay? And I'm not talking free space, I'm talking open space, okay? In some of these private areas, okay? Or spaces that aren't used. Would there be a business case for that? And I think there is. The way they have pushed on, gee, we'd really like to have this thing. That could become a little bit of what I would call a model for how you approach some of these things, okay? on a citywide basis. Just an idea. I'm just throwing it out there, but the need is becoming evident. And as you mentioned, with the ongoing growth in people downtown and cars downtown, it's not quite here yet, but it's coming. We all know it's coming. And what are some things we can put in place right now to help offset a real problem? Or do you wait till you have one whale of a problem and then everybody agrees we got to do something? And perhaps they think twice about maybe opening up part of their lot to some other users for compensation, obviously, that type of thing. Just my views. And I'll shut up right there. I'm interested in other people's opinions or views or whatever on some of this.
These are related to some of the things we've discussed or that you've mentioned also, Bob. These are just a few picked. These are the only ones that I attached. But like you'll see down in the bottom center behind what I call the Willis building. I think it's got a different name now. But this is an area that's about half used during the week, during a day. And this is a Saturday. There's just almost no use on a Saturday. And this is an area that there's a lot of parking demand on Saturday. So how can we intelligently handle this? Now, there is a sign in the upper right-hand sign. You can see this sign. Now, how many people read this sign? It's right at the entrance of the parking lot. On the bottom right is the parking on Soundview, kind of up by Columbia Bank. That's very seldom used. And it's only a half block or a block from Harborview. And here's in the center top is a typical sign. And so it doesn't really say a lot. We might be able to figure out something better that directs people to where we could go. If you look at kind of on the left here where it says Finholm private lot, now this is currently being used by the Shoreline, by Anthony's. But this part of the lot isn't used by anybody. It's the far end of the lot. Is this a spot where you might have a few employee stalls on a controlled basis? There's signs and there's stickers and whatever it might be. Should we use areas like Franklin just above in Finholm? It's really a tough area. Some people go up the stair climb and go up to Franklin. I mean, do we want to create more awareness of that? Marina parking, marinas get really upset with people that park there that aren't tenants, but if we could do it on a controlled basis, most of the time they're very lightly used. I mean, we've surveyed them at different times. And so during the week, if it's the evening is when most boat owners go there. On the weekends, they use them more, and obviously in the summer. But how can we use some of these resources as well as the churches? And I think that, Bob, your comment about talking to these people is really important. We should do and I'll try to make sure we do that we figure out. It'd be nice if you could do it face to face, but at least we could do some kind of a Zoom meeting and then try to get some input, talk about this, how we can do it.
Also, it's similar to some of the open houses that we've held for the city for parks and stuff like that. It would be interesting to get again, the business community's read on, let's say, a sense of priority of how you would do things. For example, would you attack the signage issue first? For example, very few establishments even tell you they got parking behind the building. There's nothing on the main drag at all. Okay, which again would free up public parking for other people. Okay, or just it frees up parking. Period. Okay. The second would be, for example, employee. You mentioned employee parking. Okay, that is, would they consider that less onerous or more onerous than signage telling people that there's parking in the back of the building here? So you could go, I think you could present several scenarios to try to get a sense of their priorities just off the top of the head, okay? Or what they might be really interested in, okay? So I think, one, you'd get some good ideas. And I think you'd also get some interest there, okay, from some of these people.
Well,
I think both of those would be good to tackle, both the signage and the employee issue. And
I just have a couple of thoughts that I'd like to interject. Depending on the nature of the redevelopment of the Peninsula Shopping Center, that would have a major impact on all these numbers that we're talking about. If that, the availability of the parking there, if that all went away to some redevelopment use there, that would really put a stranglehold on downtown parking. There's a lot of people that walk, that just frequent all the businesses down there that use that parking lot. So, you know, I know that there's, if it redevelops kind of in the manner with the grocery store and the retail shops that are there now, I don't see a problem. But if that somehow redevelops into a mixed use residential where you have a completely new layout of that shopping center, that would have a huge impact on things. The other thing, I think that the churches are probably the most underutilized areas, but it's the Methodist church is probably the closest one. I don't think it's realistic to expect somebody to park at St. Nicholas that's going to be going down to 7 Cs. So where the churches are located, I think has a direct correlation on how much benefit that would actually give to the overall scheme of things. I think those are important things to keep in mind. And at the very beginning, the first slide you had, Gary, was some common complaints. And one of them was, I thought I saw the word abuse, and I was just wondering if you could speak to that. Was that about the time limits, or was that the marinas talking about, you know, people that don't have a slip there parking in their parking lot?
Well, I think, you know, in terms of complaints, it's probably all of the above. I mean, I've talked to marina owners that say their biggest problem, particularly if you've got music in the park, are the people that trying to police the people and keep them out of their marinas. You know, we definitely hear from merchants that say somebody's employee always parks in front of my store and it's my favorite customer spot. So, you know, it's and like I say, in my Harbor Center building, I get the same thing. The way it works best is if no parking is assigned, but people will kind of tend to say, I want 2 stalls for my store for everybody. And that just messes it up. But it's really an emotional issue in terms of doing that. You know, the churches, the Methodist is convenient, but the north side of St. Nicholas is very convenient, not all of it. And so when you look at a church resource, there's a portion of that that would be usable, but you wouldn't want to mess with the rest of it because St. Nicholas used it, particularly during their educational programs with their schools. And my grandkid that ran in and hugged me, he goes to St. Nick's, so he doesn't want their parking taken. And, you know, so that there's certainly some possibilities. The peninsula shopping, I agree, is a big deal. And, you know, depending on what happens, and I know there's obviously a hot issue are things related to development agreements. But if a developer comes in and says, I want to do this kind of a development, part of it is what can you ask them to do that can help us? That's the whole essence of how this works. So does somebody, as a development, important enough to them that they would deck the parking and make the bottom part of the deck all public? Boy, would that be huge. And that would be perimeter parking. That would not be kind of messing with the primary walking area and the historical parts of downtown. So I guess to me, it's a big issue. If they redevelop in a way that nothing's available, it would affect downtown parking, but maybe we can turn it into a positive.
Sure. Yeah, that's, you know, definitely the cost associated with decking that 2 stories there, that would be phenomenal. But who knows in this day and age? I think that if the employees, I think you'd have an easier time trying to get the employees at some of these establishments to make some sort of arrangement with the churches where, you know, if they could get the employees parking somewhere. And I'm not sure where exactly is Harbor Center.
Oh, that's it's right down on Terabosha and Pioneer.
Oh,
It's
okay.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. How has that parking been there? It seems like there's a lot of on-street parking there now that's on both sides there now. Does that seem to have increased? Have you noticed over the last 5 years?
The amount of parking or the use of the parking?
The use.
Yeah. Well, the Harbor Center actually has, I don't remember the exact number, but about 30 offsite stalls. And they're not used over about 50% at peak times. That doesn't mean that tenants don't complain. And they also complain about people parking there that are going somewhere else. But it's like most areas, they aren't heavily used, but sometimes like AR is one of the tenants down there. And if they're having an event, there's a lot of parking around that event. It goes off and on, but overall, it's fine. And so if we can get people to cooperate, those things can happen.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Markley, you've been very quiet. I'm interested in your views on this.
Yeah, I've just been thinking as I'm listening, to all of this, and I haven't seen plans for the new shopping center. Is it being proposed that they put residential above the post office, the grocery store, all that stuff? No?
Well,
just an option.
Carl or Katrina would probably know. I don't believe so. I've heard that there's been some pre-application meetings on returning 7Cs back into a grocery store. But
yeah, Councilmember Markley, to the best of our knowledge, there's no residential component to the redevelopment of that site.
Okay, so that's helpful to understand. In regards to the churches, has there been willingness by the churches to allow their parking lots to be used either during peak times, especially during the summer, or for events I'm just thinking of how we maybe could partner in the summer when it's the busiest and the most problematic. Like if we're having an event downtown or a Thursday farmers market, maybe we can even partner with the trolley in some way where people can park at the church and have either a shuttle or trolley runs, going down, dropping people off, downtown to park, and then they take them back to their car, at a certain time. Just things like that. I don't know, in terms of advertising or communications, maybe the Chamber of Commerce can help us get some of these, the words out about these parking lots that are maybe underutilized or not known. Like you said, signage, but I'm just thinking of how we can get the information out to the public of where these additional parking stalls are that aren't being used, and then get some partnerships with the church, and maybe there might even be a volunteer shuttle, that the church may want to operate, or a small fee, they can park in the parking lot and take a shuttle down. There's a lot of things we can do. I guess it's just a matter of what do we want it to do, but ultimately there needs to be more parking downtown. And like you said, where are you going to put it? It would be great if a developer would do an underground lot, or a 2-story lot where one's underground, so it's not impeding the view. But how do you get a developer to agree to do that? I don't know. So, and I know there's been talk of blocking off Pioneer with like a planter or something, and not having people be able to go down, all the way to the bottom of Pioneer, kind of avoiding some of that traffic, which would create more parking spaces on that street. Actually, you'd lose a couple in a couple spots, and then you'd gain some in another spot. There was also talk of making Judson one way and having like 30 angle parking spots along there. I don't know what has happened to either of those ideas, or if they're even still in existence, but there have been some ideas thrown out that would create 30 to 50 stalls. So I don't know. I'm just thinking as everyone's talking of
A couple of comments in terms of the use of the churches. The Alliance has worked with the churches and they have been cooperative. For example, in the farmers market, they allow parking and the Alliance operates a shuttle to go back and forth. So there's already an established level of cooperation between the churches and the needs downtown. So, I mean, that could maybe be expanded in other ways. And, there have been a lot of things suggested, many of which you mentioned, like Judson One Way, different things. But I personally think it's very important to decide on the vision that we want for downtown and not just how we can add 10 more stalls or 20 more stalls or 30 more stalls. I think we have to start with what do we want for the character of our downtown, and then what parking makes sense that fits in with that. It's easy to glom on to one of these things and try to do it, but we already have a lot more parking than we need. How can we make it effective that preserves our downtown with the kind of character that we want? That's the real trick.
Yeah, I agree.
One thought that I have is what I don't have, because I'm not as familiar with this entire area as all of you, is a map that shows me where some of these lots are. And that would then inform me as to what might be good places to start, kind of a priority first, second, third, where we can try to get a few additional parking stalls as close to the business areas as we possibly can. And how can we work through that? And then start going outward, the farther away that we get from downtown. So is there any way we can put a map together that just shows where some of these parking lots are?
Katrina can do that, right? I've been talking to Katrina. We've talked about this, and I am not a cartographer. The map that I showed here was actually put on something Katrina sent to me, but working together, I think it'd be good to put together, and we could do that. And I can work with somebody. We need some help in doing that. We don't really have the mapping skills to do that, but Tony, I think that's a good idea to do that so that we have this clear. There's some major parking lots that are available sometimes. And if we can depict that, we can create more understanding.
Yeah, I think it's a good low cost, potential high impact work product that could go far. And, I know, Gary, we talked about wanting Laura on our design committee, our tourism and marketing director. And I think that would be great, getting her involved in this and how we can get that out with all of her channels. And I think the app idea is, something also good to consider.
Okay, I don't know, time-wise, we may be running.
I think you're right. We are, Mr.
A little short here. And I
have a lot of notes.
We need to agree on some next steps here, I think. And what I'm hearing, I think, is that some dissemination of this information on a broad basis. I'd like not only the businesses downtown, but residents of Gig Harbor. Hey, what do you think? Okay, these are the kind of things we're toying with, and just throw out some ideas and get some reactions from people. I'm not sure that they complain about it, but I haven't seen any emails, and I must get, oh my gosh, during some seasons it's 200 in a week on a hot topic. And I'll be very honest with you, on the parking thing, I don't think I've seen more than a half a dozen parking related emails during the last 4 years I've been around. Okay, it just, people don't recognize it as an issue. Okay, and obviously with the last 2 years in the pandemic, you wouldn't expect them to be talking about it all that much. But I think the first thing's got to be bring it back into focus. Called, hey, our indications are that the growth will continue in downtown attendance on things, and we're coming back to where we were in 2019, and we were starting to get on the edge there. And oh, by the way, we're thinking about some things here that might be a solution. I think your one slide in there that shows the utilization of the private church, public areas and marina areas, I think is a great one, because that really shows, hey, there is capability there. It's one of the things we're looking at, and obviously in the short term, and from a character standpoint, it would be really nice if we could fully utilize the spaces that are available before we go talking about any kind of asphalt and concrete proposition.
Absolutely.
So I think if we did something like that, it'd be great. Now the question is, how do we do that? And I don't know. Like I said, the parks has got probably the best process I've seen in terms of starting from scratch on something and getting what I would call, first of all, is their interest in this, number one, and number two, kind of get a feeling of how emotional or how attached they are to this issue, and therefore what would they consider in terms of a solution. Okay, so and I don't know, Tony, I would think I'm trying to think of somebody in our shop that could assist on that.
Well, what I'm thinking is if I get a hold of a map that has some of these parking lots, and it doesn't have to be anything fancy, then I would sit down with staff, and that would probably include someone from engineering, someone from planning, and Laura, and start putting together a plan as to how we can address this. And quite frankly, it seems to me that if we can figure out how to create, say, 20 to 40 additional spots that are available for the public, and if we can have a program where we can go to the employers and say, here's where your employees can park so they're kind of out of the way, and maybe we create another 30 to 50 open spaces in downtown, we could be at increasing available parking for customers by almost 100 spots.
Yep.
So again, go for the low-hanging fruit, and if you can get numbers like that, you're in pretty good shape, I think.
Exactly.
So, Gary, if you could figure out how to get me that information from a geographic standpoint, I will talk to Jeff and Katrina about bringing some staff members together, and let's see what we can do with that information.
Great.
I'll definitely provide that information, and I think that'll be a good joint effort.
Good.
Tony, just for the group's edification, Jeff and I have coordinated on this already, and he's offered up Mike Simmons to do the map. It's just we need the data for him to put it in.
So if we could have Mike coordinate with Gary, so Gary can say, here's the lots that we've been looking at. If Mike can put together a really nice little map using Google Maps, that would be great.
Yeah, we're right there.
Thank you.
Oh, Gary, I'll put you in contact with Mike Simmons.
Thank you.
And that could be on our website, right, Katrina?
Yes. And then if we want to put it onto, the website, Facebook, if we end up doing an app, Laura's tourism website, it can go on all those places.
Yep.
Great.
Super.
Okay.
Hopefully that will get us at least started. Okay.
Oh, I think it will.
Moving on this thing. And Gary, thank you for your input here, and your data is particularly this last year's data is really eye-opening. This thing of utilization hadn't even been brought up before. We were always thinking in terms of, like you say, where do we dig a big hole or have 3 trolleys running, short, medium, and long, or something like that. The idea of utilizing the space that we have really hadn't been broadcast very much. Okay, so I think this is groundbreaking, to be quite honest. Okay. Any other comments or follow up on this?
Nope.
Just
and
thanks
thank
to
you,
Gary.
Tony, for volunteering.
Yes, thanks, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, our next item here, looking at my trusty agenda, is countywide planning policy update. And I assume, Katrina, that's you and or Carl.
I believe Carl is taking the lead on this.
Okay.
Yeah, just Gary. Oh, there. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Perfect. Right. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, countywide planning policies. So the Growth Management Coordinating Committee has been reviewing those policies, and there was a letter that was sent from the PSRC that was requesting that the GMCC take a look at a few issues, and so the GMCC put together a subcommittee to review those issues, which we did, and there were a few minor changes made, but for the most part, there were not any real significant changes made. So mostly what you had seen before, Councilmember Himes, at the PCRC is going to largely remain the same. There will be, there's going to be some slight tweaks here and there, mostly verbiage. But the PSRC even admitted at GMCC that they provided the letter, but they weren't really they weren't demanding that these changes be made. In other words, they weren't going to hold up certification or anything like that if the changes weren't made. So they were really just asking for consideration of a few things and some clarifications. And so that was all done. Growth Management Coordinating Committee meets again here, let's see, Wednesday, actually, coming up to discuss more on the topic, kind of take a look at the final draft and determine whether we want to, move it out of GMCC and move it on up to PCRC for the final review. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. That's where we've been headed now. There were going to be, like I said, there were some slight changes that were going to be made, and the chair of the GMCC was making those changes. And so he's going to be bringing back a report on Wednesday, letting us know. So if there was anything that came up that, while he was going through that process, he's going to let us know on Wednesday. So I could give you a heads up, Councilmember Himes, if that would be useful prior to the next PCRC meeting, to let you know if there was anything that comes out of that GMCC meeting that's significant.
Great. Is the 1,000 dwelling units and 2,200 population increase for 2000 to 2044 still holding on?
Yeah, that's what the county is showing in their most recent update of their report on the growth targets, right? And so the CPPs, the countywide planning policies, will likely move forward through the process without those growth targets associated with them. So those growth targets are addendum. They become an addendum to the CPPs, and so they kind of get approved under a separate process. So they while they're running in parallel, they're not actually ending up approved at the same time necessarily. So because we still have some work to do as far as the consistency evaluation of the buildable lands report. So there's still another phase in that buildable lands that needs to be done to ensure that we're seeing consistent numbers, and that all of the data is working out properly. So that's the next step, and I haven't heard anything from the county on that process.
Good. I noticed on page 4 of Paul Ingram's letter, Gig Harbor lit up the 4th page there. And I didn't know whether we were a good example or a bad example, because I couldn't figure out what was going on there.
Well, if you're trying to encourage growth where growth needs to go, we are the good example of how to encourage growth.
Yeah.
At least from that perspective. From the perspective of the type of growth we got, it might not be a good example.
Right.
Okay. So we're good guys, sort of in a back.
But I mean, the use of development agreements in particular is what caused a lot of the growth that we had over the last 10, 15 years.
Yep.
And other cities could be doing those sort of things as well.
Okay, great.
Was there any noise out of the Department of Commerce on where they're at
I have not.
We expect to receive the OFM projections for population on April 1st. That's pursuant to the Growth Management Act. And then we'll have to look and see what those are. You know, again, they'll give us a high, medium, and low, and we'll see where those are in relation to what was approved. I say approved through this latest process.
But you've had no indication of which way they're leaning?
No, we don't. And again, Vision 2050 is a policy related, a policy aligned growth forecast. So that whereas the OFM pursuant to state law, that is just a straight growth forecast that looks at in and out migration, immigration, births, deaths, all of that. It doesn't adjust it based on policy. So Vision 2050 again is adjusting population on a policy level to be nearer to transit and larger cities. The OFM will just be straight based on in and out migration, deaths, births, etc. So there is a potential for there to be some differences in certain jurisdictions.
Okay. Anything else? By the way, I thought the article in Gig Harbor Now was very good, called the idea of getting something out there is great, called, and by the way, anything over 1,000 is pure heresy. Okay, that's the key message that just got to keep hanging with. Okay, and by the way, I think you'll get a lot of support on that. I don't think you're going to get too much disagreement on that. But I think the involvement of the citizens at this stage, and this is the earliest, I can't even remember ever seeing anything like this at this stage of prior cycles of the plan going forward. Okay, so this is good. Keep up the good work on that. That's great. Anything else on that item?
No.
Okay. Let's see. And the last item on the agenda is the employment growth target. And I assume that's you again, Carl?
Yes, it is. I'm going to bring up that memo here. Give me one moment to find it. Where is it? Where is it? Here we go. So can everybody see that okay? That's the memo that we sent out last week on employment targets. So just like with the population and housing growth targets, we also have an employment growth target that we have to propose, and that would also be part of the an addendum to the countywide planning policies. And if you'll recall, back in August of this year, I think it was, we kind of brought a precursor of employment targets based on some data that was provided to us by the county. And really, this memo is based on data that was provided to the county. So it's meant to be sort of a discussion piece to kind of get the discussion going and find out, you know, what direction we want to head in. So, you know, again, we have to stay consistent with the multi-county planning policies and Vision 2050. It's where all this stems from. And so I tried to provide some background in this memo for, you know, the reason why we're doing this and what the allocations were for Pierce County, which ended up being for our regional geography around 6%. So we're playing around with you know, this number of 8,850 jobs divided up amongst those same jurisdictions that we were looking at previously for the population and housing targets. So what we previously proposed, or what we previously showed the Planning and Building Committee, was this first table right here. Although it originally had the 2019 base year estimate, which was a little bit lower, and this is the 2020 base year employment estimate shown here. That was provided to us later in the year. So this was our previous target, 10,189 for the 2030 planning cycle. So you can see that we exceeded in employment, just like we exceeded in population. This was showing the preliminary employment growth share that was provided by the county originally. which would put us at the 16,355 number, or around 146 jobs per year over that 20-year period. So I'm taking that 20-year period from the, when we get to our comp plan adoption and going 2024 to 2044. The most recent draft of the growth target documentation from the county brought that number back down a bit, 2747. So they were looking at some different data. The base year changed, and they were also looking at numbers that other jurisdictions had provided, and putting us in about, picking up about 30% of the total growth share, Gig Harbor. And that's based on past trends. It's also based on, where the city is located and where we're drawing from. So putting us at somewhere around 115 jobs per year, if that were, extrapolated over that 20-year planning cycle. One of the things that we look at in this is a jobs housing ratio. So trying to get to a balance, or at least close to a balance of, the number of jobs you have versus the number of houses you have. Now, we know here in Gig Harbor, we're going to have probably more jobs than we have dwelling units, which sort of bears out in these statistics that the average for the region is about 1.3 jobs to housing. So that's kind of the balance that we're trying to get to. Gig Harbor is we're not going to get there. We're not going to get close to that regional average because we just don't have as many homes in the city, and we have a lot of jobs. We have a lot of commercial area here. And in fact, we had to revise our numbers, if anyone will recall, back in 2017, to get to this 10,189. We were actually lower when this number was originally proposed, but our comp plan was inconsistent then with the countywide planning policies, and therefore we had to make a change. And so we had to pick up some jobs from a couple other jurisdictions that had too many. And so there was a little bit of horse trading that happened at that time to get us to the 10,189. We still exceeded that number. So what I tried to do here was just sort of present a couple of scenarios based on the numbers that are provided by the county, and sort of show what that jobs housing ratio would look like based on the numbers provided. So you can see that, this is where we would be essentially today at 2.48. And if we chose, for instance, if we chose the first scenario at 3,500, we'd be increasing our jobs housing ratio. And if we chose this lesser number, then we'd be sort of ending up in this status quo position. Lastly, the buildable lands report shows that we have capacity right now for nearly 4,000 jobs. So either of these scenarios work within our buildable lands as we know it today. Again, we're going to be going through that consistency analysis and checking that data to sort of give it the sniff test, in other words, and find out if there are necessary changes that need to be made. So that's still next steps. But right now, this is kind of what it looks like. And so today we're asking Planning and Building Committee to just take a look at these scenarios, have a discussion around this, and see if we can come to a number for our employment targets that's acceptable. So I'll turn that back over to you, Councilmember Himes.
Yes. Yeah, I think, and this is just my perspective, the employment target is, maybe my view of this is wrong, but I think your ratio of employment to housing was a good start. Okay, that's a great place to start. Okay, as far as there's at least some rationale that goes with that says, hey, we didn't just pull a number out of the air. Here's kind of what it looks like. Okay, and by the way, as far as the county, the Department of Commerce, and everybody else, I guess I would be very interested in their logic and the model that they're working to come up with some of these suggested numbers, okay? In other words, you just can't pull stuff out of the sky called, well, we think this would really work nice for Gig Harbor, okay? We can't justify it, we can't defend it, but we think it would really work great for you guys. The other thing, and I guess they're in the form of questions, this is total employment here, whether you work at a firm or you're self-employed.
That's correct.
Okay, that, and I'm just thinking out loud here, that may be a bigger item than it has been in the past. And I think that would, I believe it might increase our thinking relative to employment numbers. By the way, I'm not judging at this point the numbers that are in front of me because I don't know. I don't have any cross checks, so I'll put it that way, to say this is good or this is bad. I'm just, I guess, expounding on some trends. And the trend that I see is self-employed, working from home a lot, online a lot, and which, by the way, I think would draw certain individuals here to Gig Harbor, and they would bring their job with them, okay? And that was the other question I had. Do we know going into this what our participation rate of employment is by residents of Gig Harbor and non-residents of Gig Harbor?
No, I don't think we do have that kind of specificity.
We could get it though.
Probably could be found.
My immediate guess, and I'm just speculating here, but my feeling is that many of the people that work in Gig Harbor don't live in Gig Harbor. Economically, they may not be able to pull it off. As far as the type of job that they're interested in, there's nothing like that available here in Gig Harbor.
Particularly when you look at the type of jobs we have, a lot of service type jobs and retail stores, all the restaurants and things like that.
Yep.
We do know that with the hospital, when that went in, and with Gig Harbor North, the housing increasing up there, we do have a large share of people living in the city that work at St. Anthony's.
That's a good point.
So that and Metagenics, those would be the two that I would call out as increasing our work and live scenario. But I agree with Tony that a lot of our jobs are service sector related.
When it comes to the methodology that Pierce County used to determine that our capacity for jobs was just short of 4,000, were they simply looking at all the commercial industrial zone property that we have and said, this is the number of jobs that these could support? Because the concept that Councilmember Himes was giving us regarding the additional people who are going to be working from home, I have no idea how much they factored that into their analysis, if at all.
Tony, that's a great question. It's something that Carl and I have talked about and something we want to press at PCRC and PSRC starting next year. You know, we're setting these employment targets and we know that they have issues now, especially surrounding pandemic employment. And the plain answer is that this kind of typical or old way of doing it does not take into account the significant teleworking that is now occurring because of the pandemic. And then, so we're going to be looking at these numbers, and likely the methodology will change because the employees that are in the jurisdictions here are, you know, if you're working in Seattle, your home business is based in Seattle, that's still where your job is showing up, even if you're doing it in, you know, your living room of your home in Gig Harbor.
Right. So given that the analysis that Pierce County Buildable Lands report did, it's probably more of an old school style of assuming that people don't work in their home as much as we know they are and probably are going to. I would strongly point toward going with the lower number for employment as an employment target, because we may end up having almost all of those because of the nature of the type of businesses that we have versus the additional people that are staying here in impacting here by working from home, we may have actually more jobs that pop up over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years than what this target even says at the lower number.
Yeah, and it's a really good point. I know that Puget Sound Regional Council is very interested in that in that idea as well about teleworking and also, you know, just the effect that the pandemic is going to have in the long run on the way people work and where they're able to live and work. And so, you know, there's not really any kind of a vision amendment process. You know, they've kind of once it's set, it's kind of set. But it is something that they're looking at. And so that I would expect that there will be in the coming years, there will be some reports that come out of PSRC relative to this discussion that will affect, like Katrina said, how we do this in the future, for sure.
You know, and taxes may end up pushing this ahead of kind of the planning process. I was on a meeting with Executive Dan Meyer, and he was talking about, you know, with more employees working within Pierce County than in the past, because they're not commuting up to King County, the taxes for those employees are still going to King County, even though the employees are working in Pierce. And so I think there's going to be a political, well, at least from his perspective, and it sounded true, a political discussion about taxes and where that money goes if the employee really is not going to home base.
And what taxes are we talking about?
Some employment tax.
Well, that Seattle has to. Are they?
I'll have to pull my notes.
I'd be curious about that, because I think having more people working here in Gig Harbor is going to have a net positive impact on our tax base, because rather than working in downtown Seattle and running out to buy lunch or running out to do some errands or do their dry cleaning or, you know, make major purchases, they're going to stay here. And spend more money here.
In terms of those taxes, I think he was more referring to some employment taxes that are paid on behalf of employees.
I think the other thing, which by the way, I think underlies this whole assumption of trying to balance jobs with population growth, is this idea of commuting. And that is, and by the way, it's for the old Gig Harbor, that's pre-pandemic and a few other things. I always argued that the worst thing you can have is somebody coming to Gig Harbor and they work in Seattle. They clog 16, they clog I-5, they clog everything. Whereas the idea of people working remotely here, not only is a benefit to Gig Harbor, but it's a huge benefit to the PSRC and the whole regional area call. That's one less vehicle that's on that commuting route, okay? And I would really push that angle, called you don't have to give them a seat on the rapid transit system that stalls sometimes, and you don't have to do all these various things, which was the driving point of this whole discussion in the first place, called what do we do to get people off of commuting routes, okay, and get them working closer to where they live, okay? At least that was my understanding.
Yeah, and that's the idea behind the jobs housing balance, of course, right? Trying to offer more affordable, attainable housing in the area where, you know, people work, so that they don't have to clog up the highways with cars or, you know, use the train.
Conversely to that, it's actually about creating living wage jobs where people live, so they don't have to commute out of their communities to go for a living wage job.
So to your point, Katrina, in the future, if this comes up as an issue, for example, where does that person count? Not only is it a benefit to Gig Harbor, but it's a benefit to the whole region, and therefore it ought to stay with Gig Harbor. Okay. The taxes for that, okay? Right. So just my 2 cents worth.
Well, it seems that, I mean, this is the mythology that was used. I don't know if it's antiquated or not, but I mean, that has a direct bearing on these numbers. And so unless you completely understand the methodology that was used, I don't know how you can really know that you're comparing apples with apples, so to speak.
Yeah, the methodology, Councilmember Franich, to maybe oversimplified, but when they take a look at it's again, vacant and underutilized, not residential, but in terms of employment zoning. And if it's commercially zoned, they break it out commercial versus industrial. And the assumption, which is, I would say within 20% usually, it's 1,000 square feet per job for industrial. It's 200 square feet per employee for 200 to 300 square foot per employee for most commercial. And so they look at the vacant underutilized land, break down, remove the critical areas, look at net developable, look at what is our typical to go on those properties, and then break it down by square footage. And that's how the jobs on a very basic level are determined.
Right, and thank you for that. But I meant in light of how many people are actually working, but they're working from home. So therefore, that's an employed person that we have here that doesn't fit into that calculation.
Yes, and unfortunately, we're not going to have that analysis in time for this. But I do agree with City Administrator that because we don't have that information, I think the lower number, the 27 or so 100 jobs, would be a good way to go, noting that we're going to have more people working from home.
I agree.
And
by the way, I assume that employment's primarily a fallout number. Once you got population and commercial stuff, then the number of workers kind of falls out of that for employees.
Yes, it's a byproduct of us zoning the property and ensuring that it's used properly for what it's zoned for.
Okay. And how does the, I know, and I really appreciate that in light of the population allocation that we're going to be keeping, or the city's going to be keeping a better idea on consistency with the comp plan once these numbers become adopted. Is the same thought process used when it comes to these employment numbers? As far as consistency with the comp plan, I'm assuming that these numbers will be adopted into the comp plan?
That's correct. It would be adopted into the comp plan, and then we would need to ensure that we have appropriately sized zones to accommodate all of those jobs, which it looks from the preliminary analysis from Pierce County that we would not need to modify our zoning with the numbers that the 2,700 or so jobs.
Okay. Right. Well, if over the course of the next several years, the city finds that we do have a lot more people that are working from home, therefore they're employed, is there any mechanism that would be able to be used that we could lower those numbers in light of new data?
Lower the
2,700?
Oh, so you're saying because we already have so many jobs in the city, so we would be lowering that projection based on that. Well, there is a process for amending the numbers once they're approved. And is everybody hearing me okay? Because I'm getting an unstable connection here. Let me know if I freeze up.
We can hear you.
There is a process for that, just like we went through back in 2017, where we amended those numbers, and there were several other jurisdictions that also amended those numbers. And essentially, they do it through a legislative. You do it through a legislative process at the local level first, passing a resolution saying that we want to change these numbers to such number, and all those other jurisdictions would do the same thing, and then that would go up to PCRC and then on to the county council, I think, for approval. So yes, I guess the short answer is yes, there is a process by which we could do that. There's a longer process that has to be done in order to get there. But
well, would that require down zoning of some commercial areas?
Yes.
Likely.
Yeah.
I agree with Tony's approach. I would absolutely go low. And if you're going to err low. And
well,
I think it would do two things. One, might get you the best possible outcome. The other thing I think would be very interesting is to force the county, and if it got to a PSRC level, force them to demonstrate their methodology and convince Gig Harbor that they're right. Right now, we're busy trying to adjust to their number. And one of the strategies that I've seen that I hope works is you throw out a different number and put them on the defense instead of the offense, okay? And it works quite well. So I'm with you, Tony. I'd say go low. When in doubt, go low. And by the way, is there a cutoff date when we have to get back on this? Carl, you mentioned some dates before, if I remember correctly.
Well, they were sort of, as you'll recall, we were getting some pressure on the population and housing targets there from the county. There's been now a few other jurisdictions that are wanting to reevaluate their target numbers, and they've asked for a little more time. Here at the 11th hour, at least we were at the beginning asking for more time. We knew we needed more time, right? So I think we did it right.
So you should tell them we covered them for 6 months. Come on, guys.
Yeah. So I think we've got a little bit of time, but I think to the extent that we could get this off of our plate and get it, get the county moving in that direction, I think that would be all the better. They would appreciate knowing that we're comfortable with the numbers. I would say as soon as possible, but like I said, I know there's a couple other jurisdictions that are now having some issues. So I guess I'll probably learn more at GMCC on Wednesday. Okay. But I would concur with looking at that lower number. If we're comfortable with that number, that kind of keeps us around that status quo. It doesn't increase that jobs housing. It keeps us closer to the regional average, which is what they're considering balanced. If we're looking for balance, and like I said, Gig Harbor is probably never going to find balance exactly, but if we can kind of keep it closer to that, then I would think that we'd probably be, that number would be received favorably.
I have an idea that kind of gets to what Councilmember Cranich was talking about, kind of options post target. And I really think that there's an opportunity in the comp plan update to have if we agree on the 2,700 number, I think within the comp plan process, we're learning more information about working from home every day. And we're really going to hit the ground running as far as policy analysis in 2023. I think there's an opportunity to look at that employment number in light of the comp plan update and put in an assumption of a percentage of our population that is working remotely. And we could have an addendum to the employment numbers in our comp plan. This is pursuant to the county process. This is an additional piece of information that we did on behalf of our city. I think that would help us to get a better picture moving forward and show that we're really serious about changing the methodology.
Well, I really appreciate that. I'm for shooting low, and I don't know. I think that in light of home employment and all the things that have gone on the last year and a half, I think we should be going in lower than that personally. But for the reasons that I talked about with the working from home angle, but I think that having what you just described, Katrina, could possibly get towards what I'm thinking about. And I'm glad Council Member Markley's here because she's the one over the next 4 years that will be carrying this ball forward to a council that's coming in that has no idea of the in-depth discussions that have been going on the last year on this whole issue. And this isn't just something that you jump into and you understand in 6 months.
So they will be drinking from the fire hose and we'll be having it on high.
Yes, I may encourage them to come and watch past meetings, whoever ends up on this committee, just to kind of get caught up if they're willing to do that. So you never know. But yes, it is going to be quite a task, and we'll be filling your shoes, Councilmember Hines, with Puget Sound Regional Council and getting a representative there. And you've really done so much work on this and have been very diligent in following this. And so I know I said I'd be the person to sit on that, and maybe I will for like a month, but I'm going to delegate that really fast to someone who's real interested in this stuff, because I want them to have the same passion as you do for really following this up. It's important. It's
maybe we can call Councilmember Himes a council member emeritus, and he can continue doing that for us.
There you go. There you go. You only thought you were getting away, Bob.
well, thank you. I think. Anyway, I'd like to extend that same thanks. See, now this is our last gathering as the old gang. Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate everybody's participation here and all the hard work that's gone into some of these things. And I know staff is really Carl, you and Katrina and your whole team has really gotten into this stuff big time, and put up with me constantly asking questions and why don't we do this or why don't we do that, whatever. Most of my schemes would end us up in jail or something. I don't know. But anyway, thank you very much for your help. Really appreciate it. And let's see. And Tony, thank you for your participation. This last year has been great. We seem to have calmed things down somewhat, and we're kind of marching along now. Okay,
right.
Not just scattered. That's the word I used before. So thank you very much, and Tracy, good luck.
Thank you.
The challenges will be great, but I think the rewards will be even greater. So my expectations are high. I'll put it that way.
Thank you very much.
I know you'll rise to that. So with that, is there anything else that we've got in the way of business? Seeing how we're right at the 4:30 mark, I think that was our target, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was.
Boy, what timing.
I would just like to thank staff, all the staff here once again for taking the approach that they did with involving the committee on this process. It's very refreshing and completely different than the way it was done under the previous staff and administration. So I really appreciate that, and everybody here has put in a lot of effort into this. So I think it's going to serve the community well. So thank you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Thank you there. And you're absolutely right. Had this been at a different time, I think I don't know what would have happened. It would have been a different outcome, I think. Okay, because I think some people would have considered council member participation to be encroachment in their territory. Okay, and you've been very supportive and very helpful in moving stuff forward here and enlightening council members as we went along the way. So thank you very much. Okay, with that, is there anything else other than a motion to adjourn?
Councilmember Himes, on behalf of staff, we also wanted to just say thank you to you and Councilmember Franich for your commitment to assisting us and participating with us over the last 4 years. And it's been really great getting to know both of you. And we really appreciate all of your time and commitment, and we wish you well in all of your future endeavors. And don't be a stranger.
Okay, I won't be. that could go either way, by the way. All right. But thank you very much. Appreciate it. And with that, and good luck to you. Like I say, you've got a lot of stuff on your plate between planning and public works. Boy, I'll tell you, your next few years are going to be very interesting. Okay. A lot of challenges out there, a lot of stuff. And by the way, that's the reason I like that article in Gig Harbor Now, is it started to show some of the work that most people don't see staff and council doing. Okay, and it exposed it right, and there it was called, hey, you probably don't know this, though. Some may figure out when the orange sign appears on their fence, something may be happening here. Others, it's when the bulldozer comes in and levels the lot next to them. It's called, something's going on here. This is great as far as getting ahead of some of these things and getting out front of them, called, hey, these things really do have to follow a process. And your involvement in that process can be very helpful at times. So I think it's a good way to go, and it's a great initiative you've got going now along those lines. So keep that up, and I'm sure Laura will be a great ally in that endeavor. Okay, anything else other than Merry Christmas to everybody here, and Happy Holidays, and only one more council meeting, but who's counting? Okay. Do we have a
move to adjourn?
Great. Second.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Have a great day.
Tony.
Yeah.
Thank you.